Everybody. I hope you're doing well. So, this week's topic, I wanted to give a little bit of a content warning about that. We're going to be discussing sexual violence a little bit. And to be completely transparent, I almost canceled the discussion of rape culture that we'll be talking about just because, as personally, a survivor of domestic violence, this is a difficult topic to talk about, and especially considering the heaviness of the world. I didn't know if I was up for it this week, but I thought about it a little bit more and realized that it was a really good opportunity to segue into discussions about resilience, which your third writing project is going to be about. So, thinking through how you all conceptualize resilience, it can be helpful to talk about some examples of it. So, we're going to be doing a little bit of that today. So, first, to just offer a broad sketch of how we would define rape culture refers to how daily life normalizes sexual violence. So, when we think about all of these everyday practices that contribute to normalizing sexual violence, we're thinking about very famously, catcalling is a big example of rape culture. So, catcalling would be understood as any sexual harassment that takes place on the street as folks are walking down the street. And it's important to note that street harassment impacts cisgender women, as well as gender nonconforming folks, as well as trans folks. So thinking about the diversity of people that this does impact is important to consider in this conversation as well. So catcalling is very prevalent example, thinking about just walking down the street and someone says like, hey sexy, where are you going? Starts following you on your walk home to your dorm. All of these things that people can write off as being isolated incidents, but they are very prevalent, and they do add up to constitute what we understand as this larger structure of rape culture where sexual violence is normalized. So, thinking about with catcalling, like, what's the harm in people, calling out, like, hey, sexy, come over here, following you. Obviously, there's different gradients of where threat is present in regards to these situations. But just the fact that somebody can be minding their own business, walking down the street, and people feeling a license to comment on that person's body, to comment on, what they look like, it speaks to larger structures of objectification, larger forces of objectification that are so normalized in our culture. So, not only does catcalling reinforce rape culture and the normalization of sexual violence, we think about these everyday activities like people telling rape jokes, like people sending unsolicited pics, if you know what I mean. So thinking about, people even asking women what they were doing if they are to, experience any kind of a sexual assault, like people saying, well, what were you wearing? What were you doing there at that time of night? Things like that, those all contribute to these forces of victim blaming that bolster rape culture as a prevalent force in our society. So, in thinking about catcalling a little bit more deeply, I thought that this would be a good opportunity to think through what resilience looks like in looking at the Stop Telling Women to Smile project that I'm also linking for you all and I sent to you all in that email. Stop Telling Women to Smile is an interesting disruption of rape culture in that the artist Tatiana Fazlalizadeh, creates these oil paintings of women that she then pastes onto different city streets that are essentially a way of speaking back to harassers. So she uses all of these different, catchphrases, all of these different very familiar lines that folks might hear when they're being street harassed, and takes those from personal experiences of folks that have experienced that, and adds them to these wheat pastes. So wheat pastes, being these giant posters that you can put up on city streets and whatnot. So you'll learn a little bit more about that in the video that I've linked to. But I love Stop Telling Women to Smile in that it offers this really interesting form of resistance to rape culture, and it takes some form of difficulty or some form of challenge that someone has experienced and turns that into a creative endeavor. So it channels really difficult experiences into something that is beautiful, into something that's resistant, into something that speaks back and centers the growth of the person that has been most impacted by that experience. So it made me think more largely just about, the pandemic that we're experiencing, and how what we're going through right now is such an intense hardship, but it varies for different folks and how different people are being impacted by COVID. And thinking about what it's going to look like for everyone to get through this experience, and what does resilience look like for each of us to get through this based on how we're experiencing COVID. So, in thinking about, even people that are having like Zoom dance parties, people that are taking up practices like journaling, even people that are like meditating or praying more when it comes to thinking about daily practices that are going to help them build their own resilience to, face this hardship and turn it into an opportunity for building strength and wisdom from it. There's so many different practices that people can employ to, strengthen, their forms of resilience. So I wanted to hear a little bit more from you in the comments about how you see different examples of resilience popping up. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the Google Classroom discussion. But yeah, thanks for being here with me for this discussion. I'll talk to y'all soon.